So, Kate, what have we got coming up today?
Well, Robert, we've got an incredible guest, Julie Montague, Countess of Sandwich, and the second of our deep dives into the special relationship it is the American War of Independence and the Gilded Age.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Queens, Kings, and Dastardly Things. I'm Robert Hardman, Daily Mail columnist and royal biographer. I'm joined, as ever, by my colleague, Professor Kate Williams, royal historian and biographer. Hello, Kate.
Hello, Robert.
And we have a very special guest today.
We are so grateful to be joined today by Julie Montague, Countess of Sandwich. You're a historian, you're a writer, you're a broadcaster. You are also a Gilded Age expert.
And we've invited Julie Montague, the Countess of Sandwich, here because she is the perfect person to talk about the special relationship, the transatlantic alliance, on so many levels, because she herself actually represents it. She is a living embodiment of the special relationship. And we're going to come on to that a bit later. But let's just recap where we got to last week, because we have been looking at how it is that America went its own way. When a hitherto loyal colony on the other side of the Atlantic suddenly said, stuff you, George III, we're off on our own. Julie, in a nutshell, I mean, the Declaration of Independence, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, that's it. America's started, they've gone off on their own, and it's all over. But it's not, is it?
And there was a lot more fighting between the two countries.
And George Washington had to do a lot of that fighting. I mean, I think it's important to remember, George Washington didn't actually sign the Declaration of Independence, did he? Because he was away doing his fighting bit as a general.
But also, there was another person fighting as well, wasn't there, Julie? Now, you can tell us all about your ancestor, who is totally involved in the story that we've told.
Completely involved. The fourth Earl of Sandwich, John Montague, he was First Lord of the Admiralty 3 times, actually, and very close ties with the king. And some might actually blame him for the loss of the colonies. And in fact, they do. But luckily, he sort of, invented something that we all have for lunch. And that...
So he's saved by the amazing thing he invented.
He's saved by the sandwich that we all...
Sandwich.
Exactly.
How did he invent it? I mean, it doesn't require a huge amount of technological know-how, but just talk us through. And we're getting off the point here because we are talking about the 250 years of the USA, but we've got to know, how did he invent the first sandwich?
All right, I'm going to set the record straight for both of you here right now. You're going to hear it here first. Because the rumor has always been, or the myth, that he was a big gambler and he didn't want to get his cards greasy, so he asked for a piece of meat to be placed between 2 slices of bread, and the rest, they say, is history, but it's not. So the family's version is the correct version, is that because he was First Lord of the Admiralty, great politician, working late at his desk to try to stop the colonies from sectioning off and creating their own country, that he was working late at night at his desk. And in fact, we've got a Reynolds portrait of him, sitting at his desk with papers in his hand. And so then he wanted to eat at his desk, as many of us do in this day and age. And he didn't want to get his political papers greasy. So then he asked for a piece of meat to be put between 2 slices of bread.
And so he's been misrepresented, this idea that he was a rather dissolute gambler who just wanted to carry on going. We need to rescue the Earl of Sandwich's reputation. He invented the sandwich, but for good reasons.
That's exactly right. And he was at that desk trying to, save the colonies from separating. Absolutely.
Tell us why he's blamed. Why is he blamed?
Well, he's First Lord of the Admiralty. Listen, this is a transatlantic war that's going on. He is in charge of that fleet.
He had a lot on his plate,
including a sandwich.
Is that no pun intended?
No pun intended. By the way, I do love the fact that actually it's very important to point out, here we've got an aristocrat working late at night, not just playing cards. He's actually having the first ever al desco dinner. Because he's busy trying to stop America seceding. But I think at the time, there's a lot going on globally. Britain by now is a sort of global presence. And yes, we've got a war going on in America, but we've got the French breathing down our necks, the Spanish, we've got the Dutch fairly soon. All these other nations are thinking, well, Britain's been a bit distracted by America. Let's have a go. So he doesn't want to put all his ships on the other side of the Atlantic to fight this war against these tricky colonialists on the east coast of America, when at any minute the French could suddenly come and land in Cornwall or Devon or somewhere. So I mean, I have considerable sympathy for him. And he understood the Navy, didn't he?
And he was, he really was well respected, not only by the monarchy, but he was well respected by, his subordinates. I think for his career overall as, head of the Admiralty, apart from that little dent of the War of Independence, he
well, yeah. Let's go back to that little dent, because that's what we are talking about.
Exactly.
So we have got this situation where the colonialists have. By the way, do you like to be called colonialists or colonists, or
I think it's colonists,
or patriots or patriots?
Patriots. So I'm gonna
Let's get the correct.
I still have my American accent, even though I've been here for a long time.
We'll stick with patriots. So the patriots are fighting now to kick the Brits out. They've declared independence, but the war goes on, doesn't it? And there is this sort of toing and froing in various battles. The war goes this way and that. The Brits have a few wins. The Patriots have a few wins. It gets increasingly desperate. And then we get to the Battle of Yorktown. And I mean, I think it's safe to say Yorktown, it's kind of game over for the Brits.
It is.
I've been to the battlefield at Yorktown. I mean, it must have been pretty hellish. I mean, it was a siege, basically, and they had no choice. They had to give up. The British Navy, your Lord Sandwich's ships tried to come to the rescue, but the winds didn't quite work. The French got there, pushed them back, and so the Brits waved the white flag. And it's amazing to think that's 1783. So we've got the Declaration of Independence, 1776. It's a full 6 years. It's about the length of the entire Second World War before we get to the end of this war. But anyway, we get to the end, 1783. I think that's the point where you can really say, the Patriots, you guys are home and dry. And then this process begins, doesn't it, Julie, of trying to forge a new identity for a new nation. Up until then, the Patriots had seen everything through the prism of Britain, of home. You have a king, you have peers, you have lords and all this stuff. No, you don't anymore, do you?
And I think this is where America at first struggled. We've just got our independence. We, of course, declared it in 1776, but as you said, the war didn't end until 1783. But what do we do now? Because we absolutely do not want to replicate what we've just fought against, this tyranny, this hereditary king. And I think that's where America really struggled. Who can be that person to lead us? We need a leader, but it can't be so grand that it becomes so much similar to England, right?
Let's have no crowns.
But it can't be, in one sense, simple, because then nobody would respect this person.
There's that really iconic moment, isn't there? There's the Newburgh letter when Louis Nicola, a colonel, who's getting increasingly worried at the end of the war that his men aren't going to get paid because Congress is a bit slow with the taxes. So he writes to George Washington, who's the commander-in-chief and is beloved, travelled all over the country, very, very admired, and says, I think you should be the king. I think this is what we should do. And George Washington writes back this really powerful reply saying, nothing has given me more pain in the entire Revolutionary Wars than the concept that this idea is in the army that I might be the king. I totally disagree. I turn it over. I totally reject it. And that is so interesting. Now, I think we can say that Louis Nicola is an outlier. I don't think many men in the army think this way, but it really underlines this question of what is our leader going to be. It does seem at this point that everyone thinking probably should be George Washington, but how can he be? What will he style himself as? And this becomes such a key part of the Constitutional Convention when they're discussing what the American Constitution will be. One of the questions is, what is the man? It's got to be a man. It'll be a man. It'll be a white man. What is the man going to be?
Quite right, Kate. And also, what is that man going to represent? And again, then of course you've got the Constitution coming in, but the values and in one sense, how long is that man going to reign? I'll use the word reign quite lightly here because, of course, as a king, you reign until you die. And there were some parameters I know that they were thinking about of making sure that it's not, going to George Washington's son. Or
that was a key moment, wasn't
unbelievable,
it? Unbelievable, because there were people saying, no, this should be hereditary. I think early on.
Yes.
That was a game changer when America said, no, hang on, we're not doing this hereditary stuff. Thank you very much.
Yes, we've had enough.
It is laid out in a quite vague way, isn't it? It's fascinating that there are 10 articles about how Congress should behave and what they should do. And yet there's 4, I believe, about the president, and that he can appoint ambassadors and other people of responsibility. I think he even appoints lighthouse keepers. So all kinds of people can be appointed. He can make foreign treaties, he can lead the army, and he can advise Congress. But it's not said how often he does this advice. You know, is it every day? Is it every week? Is it every month? And what form does this advice take? So what is he actually going to be? And this all, of course, people get very fascinated by the question of title, because John Adams, who will be the vice president, he is saying, what is the title? Your mightiness, your highness. Is this going to be a title for the president, mightiness or highness? And just as you say, Julie, their concern is if you haven't got a bit of pomp and circumstance, Europe will reject you. And this is a baby fledgling country. They are suffering in the aftermath of war. They don't want any more European armies popping in and invading.
You mentioned John Adams there, Kate, and I think let's sort of switch the action back to this side of the Atlantic, because it's really important. How does the new country, as it were, come to terms and meet the old country? And there is that fascinating moment, I think, in 1785, so it's only 2 years after the war's over, when it's John Adams who is effectively the sort of emissary. Today he'd be the US ambassador, I suppose, goes to meet George III. They shake hands, don't they? I mean, it's a great moment, isn't it, Julie?
It is a great moment. You know, George III welcomes John Adams and says, well, let's have a friendship now. Mm-hmm. And I think that, for me in particular as an American, is the start of that special relationship right there.
And Julie, in terms of, it's hard obviously to know what the general population of the United States would have felt about this, but obviously they're war weary, they're exhausted, they're glad to have independence, that's what they want. But how do you think this new relationship with the king would have been received?
I think I view it as the king and the monarchy. It was almost like the parent, you know, your elderly parents, and America is this young country, and they've broken away, they've got their independence from their parents that have been incredibly controlling, but you still have that attachment to your parents,
He was
right?
a controlling dad, George III.
Exactly. You still have that attachment to your parents no matter what. Even though the relationship was severed a bit, you know, America is an extension of Britain. And so, yes, there was this breakaway of this sort of older generation. We don't really like your rules. And wow, we want something new and we're determined. But we're still we're still your child. We want, that might be crazy to think of it as that, but in one sense, you can view it almost as this parent-child relationship.
But of course, there are plenty more bumps in the road. Then we have the slight problem of the Brits burning down Washington. There's another war to get through, isn't there? I mean, Kate, tell us about the War of 1812, because that wasn't exactly very chummy, was it?
Yes, so in terms of the 1812 war, which I think is often totally forgotten in British history and quite often overlooked in American history as well, because you have the War of Independence, you have the Civil War, and this one seems to be a little war in between. And in Britain, I think it certainly gets lost in a discussion about the Napoleonic Wars. Really, it's all about control of the sea and control of Canada. So Britain is dominating the sea as ever, dominating trade as ever, and America really does want increasing amounts of possessions and property and territory in Canada. Now we start with the burnings and this burning of the White House.
It's not probably our finest hour. It was after the Americans had actually torched, let's not forget, Toronto, or York as they called it at the time. It was a battle for, who's top dog in North America. And so British troops headed south, thought we're going to teach those pesky ex-colonialists by now a lesson, marched into Washington, set fire not just to the White House, actually, but set fire to the Capitol, the Treasury, and it was to make a point. We still have clout here in North America.
And was the president in at the time?
Yes, the president and the first lady ran away.
President Madison and wife Dolly, and they ran away. I mean, do you think they even had time to pack?
Absolutely not.
The consequence eventually was that there was a treaty between the two sides.
Exactly. And thank goodness for that, because then the special relationship could then carry on.
It's extraordinary to think, isn't it? The act of burning down what we think of as the sort of world HQ of democracy now, the White House, we're burning it down, led everybody to the negotiating table. 1815, you've got the Treaty of Ghent, and that's really draws a line under the conflict.
But the poor First Lady had only just finished her decor and it was already being burnt down and she had to run away without any of her things.
Yeah, but there, just think about it. We burn down the White House and we sow the seeds of the special relationship.
Don't try this at home, folks.
History's a funny thing. But in America, here's this young nation. It's got to find its feet and find its way. And it's really only a matter of few years, really, before you start seeing the seeds of the Civil War, isn't it, Julie? We're heading to that, and that's a moment where you're very much on your own.
And the Civil War in America, of course, was, as you quite rightly mentioned, just 50 years after the War of 1812. So I always look at America as like, gosh, we were at war a lot. You know, war with Britain and then the War of 1812. And now we're at war with one another. And that war, though, the Civil War, is really the making of America that we see today. That's the unification of America coming together. And it was a hard-fought war, and it was, a horrible war. But for me, and I think for many Americans would agree, this is the war that united the country.
That's the painful fire through which America really comes through.
And it's industrialization as well, which is what creates a totally new nation.
And so we have the Confederacy against the United States. And the Confederacy thought that Britain would come in on their side.
The Confederate side are certainly looking to Britain, aren't they, to support them, because Britain is buying vast quantities of cotton, slave-produced cotton, from the South.
They need British and French support to win, and that's what they expect we'll get. Although I understand from the history books that the research that they actually hadn't really done much checking of that in advance. It was just their expectation that Britain would say, oh yes, we're going to come in and help, which is a fascinating question considering Britain is so keen on saying we disagree with slavery, that we will have black troops during the American War of Independence when Washington had said no to black troops. So this is an interesting question, but it is about this King Cotton theory, I believe it was known as, that because so much of the cotton, I think 90% of the cotton comes in from South America to the British factories, that Britain will say, okay, we're going to be on your side, but yet Palmerston, he believed totally neutrality. Now, we do know that Britain did sell arms to the Confederate side, but apart from that, the official line was that Britain was going to be neutral and stay out of it, which really, I think, there was
some sort of sanctions busting.
There was quite a lot of arms sales, yes. For one of Britain's specialities. All times.
Britain wasn't. Yes, exactly.
Would you say, Julie, that the British policy of being neutral in the Civil War was very important towards the future relationship?
Had Britain got involved and became an ally of the Confederates, where would we be today? I mean, that war could have gone on much longer. We don't know what the end result would have been. And so, quite right, Britain decided to just, in one sense, stand back, help out a little bit, but technically not get involved.
Well, Britain at this point, I mean, the British Empire is going off in all sorts of other directions. You've got the small business of the Crimean War, which is a huge sort of policy shift. And it's sort of Britain v. France and Russia and others, but in a different sphere. So actually, I don't think Britain would have had the capacity to get really stuck in another war and a whole different continent anyway. So I think it suited Britain's purposes to sort of stay out of this one. And as you say, Julie, I mean, just as well, because it meant the Civil War came to an end. And that's really when we start to see, isn't it, we come into your speciality, we come into your era. This is a post-Civil War America. It's an industrial America. It's getting very rich very quickly. And there are suddenly an awful lot of very rich kids. And we're into the Gilded Age.
That's
Maybe
right.
you could tell us about this sort of late 19th century blossoming of the UK-US rapport.
I mean, if I could go back in time, I would want to go back to the Gilded Age. I mean, it just is, it's pioneering.
You'd be great there.
You'd be great there. Determination, the grit, the ambition, Oh, and the parties, of course. But you're right, Robert. This is a period where America is now united. And all of a sudden, you have real entrepreneurs saying, gosh, I can make something of myself, and I don't have to be part of the aristocracy or the monarchy, right? I wasn't born into this. I can just use my own determination and grit to create, railroads, a banking system, a banking dynasty, grain elevators. And at the same time that this revolution, industrial revolution, railroad revolution, banking revolution is happening in America, you've got the agricultural depression, if you like, over in Britain in the 1870s. It's starting to collapse because, of course, America is cultivating its own grain. Not only are we cultivating it, but we're creating, as I mentioned before, these grain elevators. We're able to store it. We can ship it up and down the Mississippi River. We can put it on tugboats around the Great Lakes. And we're all of a sudden dependent more on ourselves than we are in any other country. And money is flying. And you start to see these palaces being built in New York. You've got the Vanderbilts, the new money. I'm talking about the new money. Of course, there's the old money, but you've got the new money.
New York really takes off, doesn't it? It was really Philadelphia during, say, the American War of Independence that was the great city. New York was quite a little place, only 30,000 people when George Washington got his first house on Cherry Street. And New York really becomes the city, doesn't it?
It becomes, the city. It's easy access. And the building just starts to tremendously grow. But of course, then you've got this other conflict going on at the same time. All of this new money, which it is starting to clash with old money. And you've got the list of the 400. And the reason it's called the 400 is because that is the amount of people, the number of people that could fit into Mrs. Astor's ballroom.
The 400 were the elite groupings of New York.
Old
and
money.
The Vanderbilts, the new monies, were not invited.
Not invited. So what do? Well, they look over across that big ocean and they think, that aristocracy isn't doing very well. It's a mess over here for the aristocracy, right?
Yeah, it's the late Victorian era, but you're right, there are big industrial fortunes, similar sort of things happening here, big new money here.
Taxes coming in, though. So, you've got the landed gentry, all of a sudden they're being taxed. They weren't being taxed before.
So what's going to happen?
You have these very ambitious American mothers who have been shunned by Mrs. Astor, and they want to be let in, and they think, well, we've got all this money. Who needs it? The aristocracy. These young American girls who are being, in one sense, sold off by their mothers as young brides in order to get a title, in the hopes that the family would then be accepted into New York society. That's exactly what it was. It's this exchange, cash for titles. And of course, the most well-known of them all is Alva Vanderbilt, Consuelo Vanderbilt's mother, who was incredibly ambitious to make sure that she would be invited to one of those Mrs. Astor's parties. And sure enough, she was.
She does. She gets in.
She marries off Consuelo Vanderbilt, her daughter, 18 years old, in 1895, to the Duke of Marlborough, Blenheim Palace. It is huge, fast, cold, no modern amenities, and hands down, Consuelo Vanderbilt saved Blenheim Palace. Her dowry was huge. It was about $2.5 million, and that was in 1895.
But she also ensured that her mum got an invite to the next Astor party in the big ballroom back in New York.
Triumph.
And she
that
did.
Moment when she walked into Mrs. Astor's drawing room. And this is what Henry James dramatized in so many of his novels. The Portrait of a Lady, one of my favourite novels. Isabel Archer comes over, this great heiress. So what Henry James writes about, it was really reality,
of course,
for many American-British relationships.
I suppose we just have to reflect on the irony that here we are, we're 1 century on from the Patriots rising up, kicking out this bunch of chinless, hereditary British tyrannical toffs, and a century later, they're all basically rebuilding stately homes. They're becoming duchesses and I must say countesses as well. And it's sort of come full circle, hasn't it?
It really has. I mean, that's what's so extraordinary about it. You look at these American heiresses, and again, this special relationship, and that was let's not forget, Winston Churchill's mother, Jenny
Jenny,
Jerome,
yeah.
one of the very first of these American heiresses to come over and marry into the aristocracy. Of course, she didn't marry a firstborn son. She married the second son of the Duke of Marlborough, but still very...
He's still Lord Randolph.
Yeah, he certainly is.
Blenheim's pretty big.
And as you show in your, it's in your Substack, and also you do a lot of this on your brilliant YouTube series, American Countess, which is such a huge success, and many, many subscribers after your great series on the Smithsonian. You show that initially, as you say, it's the American mothers doing it, but then the British really are out there looking for American wives.
They are, and I think it's partly because you have these American women coming over. They are so well educated. They're musicians, but also they're bold. They're funny. They've got great humor. They don't really take things as serious as, let's say, an English rose would. They sort of are like whatever about manners. I mean, yeah, manners are there, but they have no idea about the extent of the manners that I guess Britain really represents. And so they're more laid back and fun.
Julie, were they bringing over innovations like heating to aristocratic castles?
Absolutely. I mean, look at Blenheim. When Consuelo arrived, I think she had to go up several flights of stairs to just run a bath. And she was the one who put in those modern amenities that she had back at home, back in America. So there were so many American heiresses who came over and in one sense saved the country house by putting in plumbing, heating, modern amenities that these heiresses were used to back at home.
So, I mean, here we are. We're right at the tail end of the 19th century, and it is amazing to think that 100 years on from these brave, bold, plucky patriots kicking out these useless and rather arrogant English toffs. 100 years later, here are all these very eligible, very rich US hot chicks.
Hot chicks, Robert.
Well, I mean,
that's a sexist term.
Well,
for these educated, intelligent women.
Yeah, but they're cool, they're rich, they're sassy, they're educated, and they're a great export. And they come over here, and what they're after is the precisely that aristo kudos that their forebears were shaking off. And I think it's so fascinating that 100 years later, it's the US to the rescue, and it's doing great things for all these falling down British stately homes. It's doing great things for social respectability of these tiger mums on the eastern seaboard who want their posh invites from Mrs.
I think these days they're called helicopter moms.
Helicopter, yes. Well, I don't think anyone.
I'd do anything for central heating myself if that were the
well,
possibility.
exactly. I mean, and frankly, I think every toff in Britain can thank these American heiresses for the fact they've got a hot bath, and every pushy mum in New York can thank their daughters for their rise in their social status. So the Gilded Age is thoroughly gilded, and we are coming to the end of the Victorian era here, and I think we're about to enter a totally new phase of the special relationship, and that is when, if you like, British royalty accept this can-do US spirit. And that takes us into a whole new dimension. It's often said that the 20th century was the American century. One might well say the 21st century is too. We're going to come on to that next time. But for now, we're going to end it here at the tail end of the Victorian age. For now, I want to thank our guest, Julie Montague, the Countess of Sandwich. Thank you. From me, Robert Hardman, goodbye.
And me, Kate Williams, goodbye.
And me, Julie, goodbye.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie.